Welcome to Put Simply, the podcast that puts what's happening in the world simply without compromising on the details. Erdem Koch is my name, Ozan Ibrisim and Rodney McCune, my co-hosts. Gents, it's been a minute. Welcome back post Northern Hemisphere summer. Hope you're both well.
Well, I'm pretty tanned. I don't know about you, Rodney.
I'm amazing, to be honest. This is I've never felt finer. It's a very timely return to this.
Amazing what a couple of weeks off can do to anybody. So wonderful to see you both again. And let's get straight into it, starting with what is happening in Indonesia. Since the 25th of August, mass protests has erupted over the country. There's now several people missing. There's lots and lots happening. More than around six people have been killed since the protests have began. And it's just a very concerning situation. Ozan, take us through what is happening in Indonesia.
Well, I mean, it's quite a concerning development since the 25th of August when the protests started. The protests were in response to effectively local legislators increasing their entitlements, their pay. I think at this stage already they earn something like 30 times more than what the national average income is. And they also have quite a substantial housing allowance. So I think they were trying to increase that even more, which of course didn't go down too well with a country that is really struggling from the point of view of growing unemployment. It's got a very young population. Many people are working as in the gig economy and really are finding it hard to make ends meet. So I think it was a bit of a slap in the face for a lot of the ordinary Indonesians, and they really responded with what started off as being quite small protests, I believe, in on the 25th of August, but then quickly escalated into quite violent protests, and it got worse pretty much. I think on the 28th of August, when a 21-year-old rideshare driver Afan Kurniawan was run over and killed by a police van. This, of course, really fueled further protests to the point where a number of legislative buildings in various different parts of Indonesia were set alight. And it even resulted in the president, Prabowo, cancelling his trip to China, where, of course, over the weekend, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization met. The SCO was meeting, and yeah, it's quite a concerning situation, and I think it really goes to show what what you're seeing this in many places in Europe, other places. We've got a major kind of cost of living situation, and countries like Indonesia have been hit very hard. They've even in the recent budget, they've had to cut quite a lot of programs. There was a very, very important program that was going to provide free lunches, free school lunches. They've had to substantially cut that because they're facing significant fiscal pressures, and people are really doing it tough. And in the face of that, you have what are deemed elites giving themselves a significant pay rise. I mean, it just, I think, sends the wrong message to the populace, and so they've really reacted in a negative way.
We are seeing protests all around the world, indeed, usually for other reasons, though. There's not really a sort of a backlash against the political class over something like this. And Rodney, Indonesia is not necessarily a country where we see protests that often. It's a bit of a unique situation, would you say?
No, they've been cyclical within Indonesian society, and often it's the way to manifest disappointment with the government. 1998 brought down the Suharto government after 30 plus years. And I guess how the government responds to the protest will be interesting, given that the current um, uh, President Prabowo had allegations of torture and disappearing democracy protesters in the late 90s in relation to the protests that brought down that government. He was in the army at that time, so it'll be interesting to see whether certainly from his direct experience in whatever form in relation to that he's learned from it, that this isn't going to go away unless it's managed down rather than dealt with by force. But there were protests in mid-August in relation to property taxes in another region within Indonesia. So there clearly is a um, level of disquiet and unhappiness in relation to a feeling that increasing financial burdens falling on people who aren't very able to pick it up, whilst the political class and the elite are doing all right for themselves. But the TikTok shine that Prabowo had pre-election seems to have definitely um, worn off. But I mean, even in the Philippines, there's problems at the minute in relation to a perception that those involved in some of the infrastructure work that's being done, that they're just creaming money off, and their children are living, of those who have received contracts, are living a very affluent lifestyle and so on. So it's really a perception of inequality, and probably with a heavy dose of corruption being perceived in relation to how things are being dealt with by the government, which is a shame, because obviously that's what Indonesia wants to move away from, because they're about to conclude a trade deal with the EU. They obviously have to take the bumpiness of the Trump tariffs, and this impacts on trade and investment. And if you look at political stability of all the countries who are at the SCO, only one of those attending hasn't got the head of state, and it's Indonesia. And whilst that may make good political sense at home, not to be leaving at a time when there is this unrest, the optics abroad are that he couldn't attend because there's such level of instability. Not great. So it's a tough period for Indonesia.
I think the last time they had such widespread protests, if I remember correctly, Suharto was on a trip to Egypt, and I think that was one of the things that really, I guess, worked against him. But look, I think protests themselves, I suppose, are not too unfamiliar in the Indonesian context. Indonesia, from within this region, is actually quite it's a region that's got a pretty well developed democracy. We've talked about this on Put Simply before, in the lead up to last year's election in Indonesia. Very free, fair elections, and people usually demonstrate or express their discontent through the ballot box. So it's rare to see kind of this level of violence, I guess, being displayed, and this type of thing spiraling out of control so quickly. That's certainly rare, but I think there's a healthy culture of protests in Indonesia. But this one feels a little bit different, and I think a lot of, I guess, things have been built up over the last 12 months since the election, certainly, and since the current president taking office in October last year. We've seen a lot of economic problems surface, and a lot of promises that were made through the TikTok election have not been met, I think, and things have gone the other way. I mentioned some of the important fiscal programs that were supposed to be put in place. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. It's concerning.
Well, as you mentioned, Rodney, it does come on the backdrop of the SCO summit in China, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where so many different meetings are happening. Obviously, lots of heads of state in the region, except, as you mentioned, of course, the Indonesian president. Lots of side talks, lots of bilaterals. And the one that, of course, most of the media is reporting today has been the talks between the Chinese president and his Russian counterpart, which the Russian President Vladimir Putin hailed as an unprecedented level of relations between the two countries. Take us through what's happening between Russia and China at the SCO, and any other sort of broader implications for the region and the world.
Well, obviously the big news on the arrival of Modi was how friendly the gaggle was between Xi and Modi and Putin, and the Indian media was poring over this great diplomatic success, and obviously they've gone off and had their meetings as a result of it. So certainly the optics in the photograph were good. But the truth is, as much as America and the US is making things difficult for their relationships with others, and India has always been a problem in relation to um, its position during the Cold War and so on. And it's never been as pro-West as either the US or Europe would like India to have been. So as much as the US is pushing India closer to Russia and China, those relationships are not easy ones either. There's historical challenges for those countries in terms of working together. So I'm sure the photograph will be an irritant in the US. It'll be a source of criticism for Trump, of Trump. It'll be of some concern that, a whatever third of the world's population and maybe 20 to 25% of global GDP resting with these large powers is all sitting in a bloc that doesn't have European um, or North American involvement. It doesn't mean that suddenly something amazing is going to spring from this, but it does open up a platform for those countries improving their dialogue. What was I instead of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it was originally described, this meeting, as the League of Authoritarians or something, wasn't it? But anyway, Moody's chosen to get involved in that, obviously showing that he has other friends. It's good for Russia and China in terms of reaffirming their relationship. It's great for Putin to be seen to be um, shaking hands with so many other leaders, and not all of them as tarnished as he is. There was a photograph with him and on a handshake with the Turkey's leader today. And I'm sure there'll be many others over the next phase. It's also important to remember that this really does go into Southeast Asia with Indonesia, Malaysia, um, I think Cambodia, Laos, certainly Myanmar, Nepal. There's many countries involved in this meeting, as well as obviously Central Asia, nearly every country in Central Asia, if not all of them. Pakistan's there. There was some joy in the Indian coverage that there was a perceived snub for Pakistan's leader. So, all these things in the optics will have some people feeling up and others feeling down. But what can be achieved in terms of substance, well, that's a longer course, I think.
I mean, I think the biggest winner out of this, and probably the last 2 or 3 weeks, has been President Putin. He has been able to show the rest of the world that despite being, found to be a war criminal by the International Criminal Court, he's able to go to many countries, including able to go to Alaska and be given a red carpet welcome by President Trump. But he's able to go and show his leadership and his country's leadership in what is quite a significant forum. So he's really come out of this on top, and I think that's something that is a concern for people who are watching the geopolitical space. It's given him and Russia a renewed kind of sense, I guess, of commitment to what they're doing, and it's given them kind of some encouragement from other countries in terms of what they're doing in Ukraine. So I think that's the biggest win. And generally speaking, the actual forum itself, it comes at a very important time because we have what can only be described in the US as very shaky global leadership, despite the fact that Trump and Republicans are running around saying that President Trump is fixing peace in 7, 8 countries around the world. He's ending wars that didn't even exist, and this is a very interesting time for this group of countries to come out and show an alternative to the old kind of Western democracy or Western order. And if you have a look at what some of the leaders have said in some of their communiques out of the forum, they're talking about, President Xi talking about that global governance is at a new crossroads, and he's calling for joint efforts to build a more just and balanced international governance framework. President Putin's talking about how we've got to get away from these Cold War types of stances by Europe and the US, and we need to put a lot more emphasis on multilateralism, on the UN and other kind of international cooperation platforms. Effectively, this is a stark contrast to what is coming out of the US. And if you talk to the people in the US and what the US is looking at is it's like, we have a country that feels aggrieved because the order, according to America First and President Trump and most Republicans, the order that they played a major role in creating is not working for the US anymore. And they're trying to change the order, but there's nothing. They're not putting anything forward as a credible alternative to the order that we've had for the last 40, 50 years, and created a vacuum. And this forum allows, the likes of President Xi, President Putin, Modi, to fill that gap and fill that vacuum with an order that more, I guess, closely resembles what they want and how they run their individual countries, which of course is very different to how Western democracies want the new order to look like. So it's a very interesting time. I think the contrast and a lot of the significance is not lost on most people, that this group of countries look like they're coming together like adults and discussing issues and economic cooperation, etc., whilst the Western democracies and the Western world are fighting amongst themselves, led by the US.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because appearances and I guess how things are portrayed is sort of everything in politics, including global politics. And in many ways, The Guardian today is reporting the SCO is sort of easy to dismiss because it's a block that's a bundle of contradictions when you have a look at what, the adversaries between India and Pakistan, the issues between China and India, the issues between Russia and China, the role of countries like Turkey, etc. However, it is, to your point, Ozan, of a coming together of these leaders sort of standing around, smiling, laughing, standing shoulder to shoulder. It's definitely going to be very interesting to see where this sort of goes and what some of the implications are well beyond, of course, South Asia, and how that sort of works in the broader world, particularly in the US, and how Trump sees what's happening in that part of the world, and whether any sort of more actions or more implications politically will be taken in terms of this new world order that really he's been trying to drive for quite some time. Now, speaking of Trump, it's very rare. Yeah, go.
I was just saying, you've hit the nail on the head. The images, you couldn't get a bigger contrast. On the one side, you've got President Trump pushing divisiveness and trying to have a situation where the US wins and everybody else loses. That's the perception. Now, when you talk to people from America First or MAGA, etc., they'll say that's not the case, but that's what it looks like because nobody's winning out of Trump's tariffs, including the US. But then on the other hand, the contrast is you've got a group of people who are not really renowned for creating a great world order, certainly by the way they treat their own people, coming together to talk about cohesion and greater economic cooperation and greater political cooperation and looking towards a brighter future. They look, to be honest with you, they look much more like they've got their shit together than the West has right now.
Well, there's one Westerner who's winning, I guess, and that's our former friend Rudy, who looks like he's going to be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which may or may not be the main announcement that President Trump is going to be making later today at the time of recording, of course, so in the afternoon on Tuesday Eastern time. But take us through that, Rodney, because Trump hasn't been around for the last 6-7 days. There's been a lot of rumors about his health and so much so even whether he's alive, but he was pictured yesterday. And what's the go with Rudy, who's of course just had a traffic accident himself?
So I suspect Trump is still alive now. Whether his health's good enough that he can see out the rest of his presidency long term. That remains to be seen. But as for Rudy, who was one of Trump's greatest cheerleaders, and he had the amazing press conference outside the the flower stall or whatever thing, because he booked it wrong. He's had the makeup running down his face. He's had some great moments that are associated with Trump era, but now he's had a car crash, and it seems to be that he's recovering well. But initially, when the news came out about his car crash, it all seemed very odd, because the reporting now says that he was driving when he was struck from behind, and then was involved in an accident as a result of this other car making contact with his vehicle. But what's not longer on the reporting is that prior to this, that he had been flagged down by a lady in distress. And Rudy, being the former mayor and great citizen, decided to pick up this lady in distress, and she was present, I'm presuming, though it's not 100% clear, in his car at the point of collision. And there's a suggestion that the car which collided with him is in some way related to another party associated with this lady in distress. Now, of course, I don't know the geography of the city, so it's hard for me, or the location, it's hard for me to say, whether it was really realistic that he had picked someone up on a highway in this area or wherever exactly it did, because I don't think they give precise details of the location, and people with local knowledge might be better informed as to sort of the geography and so on. But all very odd. He's been as his media people said, some sort of good Samaritan, and then ends up in some sort of car accident where he seems to have suffered some quite serious injuries, including fractures. And remember, he's a man in his 80s. But yeah, if it wasn't for Rudy's outstanding character, such that he's about to be made, or he's going to get some congressional or presidential award, highest honor that one could have. If it wasn't for his upstanding character, a chap who picked up a lady in distress, allegedly, was then involved in a car accident, potentially involving another vehicle, might well have the police starting their investigation of the circumstances from a different premise. But for Rudy, it's Good Samaritan, evil other car driver, serious injury, and hopefully he gets back to good health soon so he can have this medal pinned on his chest by Donald.
I think the press conference you were referring to was the one that was in front of the Four Seasons Total Landscaping during the last,
yes, exactly.
which is, I've got to say, the funniest thing I remember, I have seen in a very, very long time. For those listeners who might have forgotten, effectively this was, I think, a few days after the election. The Trump campaign wanted to do a press conference to talk about all of the states and all of the legal actions and proceedings that they had commenced in response to what they called the stolen election, and thinking that they were going to do it at the Four Seasons. I think whoever was organising the event got the place mixed up, so they ended up doing it at the Four Seasons landscaping thing, which was basically some small business with a shed at the back, and they had the whole conference there, and it was hilarious because they all knew the mistake that they made, but they just kept going with it and saying this is such a great business, etc. And it was next to an adult bookshop, I think, as well, or a sex toy shop, something like that. But yeah, go and check out the clips. It's one of the funniest things ever.
Yeah, it is good. And of course, he had his huge court case loss from the defamation stuff in relation to the Georgian election workers that he was found to have defamed. But apparently he's settled that now in full, because at one time he seemed to be evading the bailiffs around New York and sort of trying to avoid that substantial award that was given against him. But maybe he's back in money Ozan and able to go out driving and, help people in distress late at night.
I mean, I just look, to be honest with you, I feel sorry and feel sad about this situation. He's fallen down from those times when he was considered the people's mayor, and particularly some of the stuff he was doing during September 11 when he was the mayor of New York. Like he was considered a pretty amazing leader by both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. And
But what does that
now
tell you?
he's
Does it tell you that he suddenly turned a corner to become a public figure of fun, or that he was always that and circumstance allowed him to be presented in a certain way?
That's a good question. But regardless of the reason, he's the butt of pretty much everyone's jokes now. So it's a bit of a shame. I mean, he also doesn't help himself. I guess he's got this podcast where if you want a half an hour, an hour of entertainment, go and listen to his podcast. I mean, he's just mad. He's some of the stuff that comes out of his mouth. It's like, my God, give it up. It's just he's literally mad.
Well, speaking of mad, that's of course the accusations being given to President Trump from the Illinois governor. Of course, President Trump now has his eyes set on Chicago in terms of deploying troops to that city after he'd already done that in Washington, D.C., and claimed that the city has now, as a result of that, been sort of crime-free for that period of time. Ozan, what's going on? I mean, is this just going to keep working his way through major American cities until he gets what he wants, or...?
Look, I think it's good politics by President Trump, to be honest. I think it's a great distraction. He gets to own the libs. He gets to look tough. And he achieves a whole raft of objectives, such as, along with the National Guard, gets to give ICE agents a lot more flexibility to go and do their job of, hit their target of 1 million illegal immigrants to be deported. But it's very good politics, because at the end of the day, what it does is it puts the Democrats in a very difficult position. So with the Washington, D.C., calling in the National Guard to Washington, D.C., he's able to do that. Washington, D.C. is not a state. It doesn't have a governor. However, other states, such as California, where he also put in the National Guard, despite the governor's resistance, and now Illinois is talking about it and bringing the National Guard to Chicago. He needs, obviously, the cooperation of the governors, but it's very good politics, because what he's arguing is, and let's be very clear, this is not about crime. It's not about crime in the slightest. What he's arguing is that crime is out of control in a place like Washington, D.C., and he needs to step in, be the tough man, and fix it. Now, crime, if you look at the statistics, is not it still might be bad, and I'm going to come to this, but it's at a 30-year low. So the data doesn't add up, the numbers don't add up. But why I mentioned that it's great politics is because, if you live in Washington, D.C., as many other big cities in the US, you are driven by this perception that crime is out of control. Crime is always out of control, and it's a perception. And, in politics, perception is everything. And so it puts the Democrats in a very difficult position, because the only thing they have to oppose it is to say, well, no, actually, look at the statistics. And of course, people, if they've been mugged, or have heard of someone in their circles getting mugged, or God forbid, being the victim of a violent crime, statistics don't mean much. It's all about perception, and it really does make it very difficult for the Democrats to push back, because it builds the narrative, or kind of reconfirms people's views that Democrats aren't tough on crime. But this has got nothing to do with crime. It's a political move. It's a distraction, and it's flooding the zone. It's the same tactic. He breeds of tension and conflict, and if he doesn't have tension and conflict, then people are going to be asking, well, what are you doing to fix all of these problems? But what he's doing is creating a problem with the governor, Pritzker of Illinois, and now there's a big conflict, and and he gets to fight that and fix it, and this will boost some of his numbers amongst his base. But I think most people are waking up to the fact that he is not serious about fixing crime and putting the National Guard in, against the wishes of the governor. I'm not sure that's broadly popular outside of his base.
Yeah, like it was on 100% right. Good politics from Trump puts the Democrats under pressure as to whether they're prepared to tackle crime or they're just opposing Trump for the sake of it. You can double and triple the police budget, and you will, of course, reduce crime. Putting the National Guard in any city is going to reduce crime. Um, you know, an infinite budget would make a huge reduction in crime in any city or whatever, but it's not sustainable long term. And of course, it only is as good at reducing crime as it is until there's some episode where someone who's not trained as a civilian police officer oversteps the mark. There's injury or someone loses their life, and then of course there becomes widespread protest and there becomes substantial crime all over again. So I, I think this is a difficult one for the Democrats to make clear what their argument is, but in effect, they don't want the militarization of the streets. What they want is an increase in civilian policing budget if there's a crime issue that has to be dealt with. And that's the proper way to address it. And sadly, they may only become able to have that argument land effectively after there's some adverse incident that occurs. So it's a challenging one, this one. And it's good from the administration and putting these I mean the DC mayor's accepted that crime's been reduced. You have to accept the facts, but is this the best way to do it? Well, that's a different point.
Well, and also, is it sustainable, right? I mean, you can deploy troops to any city, to your point, Rodney, and a really good point, I think. And you're going to see an immediate impact. I mean, when you've got sort of army personnel walking around with guns and tanks, which is, of course, what's been happening in DC, naturally, any people who don't want to be abiding by the law, they're going to start thinking twice about their choices. But it's not sustainable. But if it's the short-term win that Trump's after, then to Ozan's point, I think absolutely he's getting those wins. And it is crime is one of those things that's very hard to argue against, right? Because if you are on the opposing party or the other side, it's very hard to say, no, we shouldn't do more for crime. Even if you say this is not sustainable, this is not the way to do it. It's one of those really, really tough things to argue. And to your point, Ozan, I think that the politics of it here is definitely working in Trump's favor. But of course, the politics across so many states now is turning its focus to something else, and that's something called redistricting, I should say. It's one of those words that means something else in America than what it does in other parts of the world. So we're getting our head around the terminology here. But what is redistricting? Why does it matter in the US, particularly in the lead up to the 2026 midterms, Ozan?
So effectively, what this is all about, and many of our listeners, while we were bathing in the Mediterranean beaches and sunbathing and having a great old swim, might have heard about what's happening in Texas, and also Gavin Newsom in California, his response to it. So it all has to do with the number of seats each state has in the Congress. So the Congress, I think, has 400 and something seats, and each state has a certain amount of seats allocated according to their population. So that all gets determined every 10 years according to the census. So the government goes and, in each state figures out how many people live there, and according to that, they draw these maps that allow, that kind of reflect the population of the city, and determine who gets elected into the Congress. Now, everybody knows right now that the Republicans hold the Congress by about 2 or 3 seats, so it's very, very close. And there's midterms coming up in 2026. So what the Texas governor did was effectively say that they're going to do what's called a mid-cycle redistribution, or redistricting, sorry. And what they're trying to do is right now in Texas, effectively the Republican Party have a majority of the seats that are on offer. However, the Democrats have, I think 9 or 10, and what they're trying to do is reduce the number of seats. So effectively, uh, make more of those seats Republican by what's called gerrymandering. So they will redistribute the maps. So you might have some districts that are very tight between Republicans and Democrats, or they might be very small margin Democrat seats. So they're going to redraw the maps so that they get rid of all of those and give a net. The net effect will be that the Republicans will pick up 5 extra seats in the state of Texas. So in response to this, the governor of California has basically started a process. Gavin Newsom has effectively called for a referendum to do exactly the same thing and redraw the maps in California so that the Democrats, who are very powerful in California, will be able to pick up 5 seats extra, reducing the Republicans to a very, very small number of seats in California. So the gerrymandering wars, the redistricting wars, etc., are in full play now. There's going to be a referendum in November this year, and if the Californians say yes, then they'll be able to change the maps, and effectively that will cancel out the 5 extra Republican seats that have been won, or that will be won in Texas due to the redrawing of those maps. Now, this is obviously really bad for democracy, because what it effectively does is it creates a whole bunch of seats that are not reflective of the whole society in general. Gerrymandering generally is not a great thing for democracy, because what it effectively does is it puts, in the case of Texas, for example, there will be seats where there's a very significant large number of minorities who might be spread across 3 or 4 seats. What this does is it brings them into kind of one seat, and then effectively, if traditionally minorities voted more Democrat, then they're not able to play a role in electing Democrats in various different seats, but they're all concentrated in the one area, so they can only elect one Democrat. So it becomes it's not very representative, it's not very democratic, and this has been a problem across the world. It's not just the US. Gerrymandering happens in various different places. But it's very dangerous right now where we are, particularly because, Gavin Newsom's fired back. But at the end of the day, the Republicans will come out on top because they control a whole bunch of other states, and a lot of these states, like I think Mississippi, Florida is looking at it. These states will be able to gerrymander and create a scenario where you've got more Republican seats net. There's just not that many Democratic states that are left that you can effectively gerrymander. So it's a big one. It's and also just the other thing to mention with the California referendum is it's supposed to be a temporary thing. So they will go back to the maps, and they will have an independent authority redoing the maps after 2030 once the next census is done. And most of the democratic states and most democratic members, etc., are in favor of an independent authority to draw the maps. So it shouldn't be politicians drawing maps and figuring out, or determining which seats they should be kind of running for. And that's the case in a lot of countries. I know in the UK, Australia, Canada, there's an independent authority that does that does the maps and determines which electorates are where.
Yeah, look, I just think that the Democrats should have figured out pretty early on in this that there's more states that are in Republican hands than Democratic hands, and if redistricting goes off on an industrial level, they're more likely to lose out. And therefore, given that certain segments of the Democratic voter base want to continually push the point that Trump is anti-democratic or he's moving the country away from democracy, that it should have been pitched as this mid 10-year redistricting, which is not normal, is an anti-democratic device, and they should have used it to get their own vote out. Now, whether that as a calculation would have made no difference, and that's why they've gone down this route of trying the tit for tat response, I don't know, but it just it doesn't look good for the Democrats. If what the Republicans are doing is against democracy and you're just copying it, you don't really find yourself on any moral high ground whatsoever.
I guess the response to that would be that, this is, I think Democrats have had enough of trying to, kind of occupy the moral high ground. The view is that the Republicans are playing by their own book. They're not playing by any rules, and not fighting back, and that's what Gavin Newsom's doing, saying very well, stating clearly that this is not good for democracy, but we have to stop
But we'll
it
do it
because
too. It's not good for democracy, but we'll do it too. It doesn't work for me, I'm afraid.
No, but if you have a look at what is right, and I'm not defending him. I think it's good that somebody's fighting back. But like at the end of the day, if you look at what the actual bill is, it's about stopping anti-democratic kind of actions by Texas, and it's an anti-vote rigging bill. So yeah, I mean, sure there'll be some people who view it like that, but at the end of the day, I think the Democrats can't afford to unilaterally kind of disarm when it comes to this stuff, because that's what they've been doing, and the Republicans are, pushing full steam ahead and effectively rigging the system to make it more in their favor. So, at some point, I think it's positive that Democrats are fighting back, and finally, I think most Democrats are getting some, energy from Gavin Newsom standing up and saying, no, we're not going to let this happen. So yeah, in an ideal world, I think it's bad that anybody does it, but there's nothing in the US right now in terms of politics is ideal,
or in most places in the world, I'd argue.
Absolutely.
Can we not have one thing before we end off? Obviously, we've got this big Trump announcement at whatever, I think 2 p.m. was it Eastern time or something. I think we should all be forced to guess what it is.
Ooh, it's tough.
Can we be extreme?
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. What is extreme in the world of the Trump administration? It could literally be anything.
That's a good point.
I'm going to go first. I think he's announcing a new meme coin.
I think he's going to announce that there's going to be a man on Mars before 2030. So it's his version of the Rice University speech. We do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard, etc. John F. Kennedy type style.
All right, and I think he is going to announce that he's made a breakthrough for his purple hands by drinking some absurd chemical. It's very similar to what he did during the COVID days.
Which was referred to him by Joe Rogan. Yeah,
that's the one. Yep. So if he's on Rogan's podcast again next week, we'll know why.
And if it's all three, then we share the outcome.
Mate, if it's all three, we're going to be the #1 podcast in the world, I think, by next week.
All right, good stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you both, gents. Great chatting this week. See you next.